Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today you're going to hear from our very own Dr. Joe Flanders in his interview with musician and producer Jon Hopkins. This is a really special interview, folks. So, Jon has been producing music for over 20 years. He's written 6 studio albums and has collaborated with and produced albums for bands like Coldplay and Brian Eno. His album Singularity received a Grammy nomination for Best Electronic Dance Album in 2018. His latest album, Music for Psychedelic Therapy, that's the one we're really excited about, was written as a soundtrack for ketamine experiences. And you'll hear in this conversation that this music, this particular album, afforded Joe a very profound experience in his own ketamine journey. Joe and Jon discuss Jon's motivation to write music for psychedelic therapy, his collaboration with Brian Eno, his meditation practice, Jon's view of live music in the COVID era, the role of music in psychedelic therapy, how Jon used ketamine in the process of actually creating Music for Psychedelic Therapy album, his views on the relationship between pain and beauty in art and in life, and the Ram Dass lecture that formed the lyrics for the very powerful closing track on the album. If you're looking for a way to increase the likelihood that Reed, myself, and Joe become world-famous podcasters, which I know you lay awake at night thinking of how to do, you can always go and give us a 5-star rating on places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It would mean the world to us. We are so thankful for the people who have already left those reviews. They are so generous. If you have any constructive criticism, you can always email us. You can find contact information at numinous.com/podcast. Without further delay, here is Joe's interview with the artist Jon Hopkins.
Jon Hopkins, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How's the day?
I'm in London. It's extremely hot and sunny. It's very beautiful. I've been talking to some people today, having a nice day of conversations and press, and but like we were saying before we started, I think it's luckily it's an ever interesting subject, you know, the intersection between music and healing and psychedelics. So yeah, I find I never really get bored of it. So it's been a very interesting day, and after we've finished, I'm going to go and sit in the park and get some sun.
Awesome. So I'd like to start with your latest album, and that's really what the focus of the interview is going to be here. So Music for Psychedelic Therapy. So I think you mentioned earlier this was the title was a very deliberate choice. You stepped into, I don't know, maybe some new territory in your career. Not that you needed to, because you have pretty stellar CV so far, collaborating with some of the top musicians in the industry, Grammy-nominated album. What was the motivation to get into creating music for psychedelic experiences?
It's interesting. I mean, I always approach every album without a plan, and the older I get, the more trust I place in intuition and in the subconscious. But I suppose looking back, you know, I can retrospectively analyze how I ended up making it, and I think it's a combination of having had many psychedelic experiences myself and conversations with my friend and yours, Dr. Rosalind Watts, who asked me to help advise on the playlist, some of the tracks that would appear on the playlist that she was using for her psilocybin for depression trials that she was doing for Imperial College here in London. It started to become apparent to me that whilst there's so much incredible music out there that works very well for psychedelic guidance, it tends to be like a playlist might comprise, if it's 6 hours long or whatever, it might comprise 100 artists, you know, and that's like with each new track that comes on, it's like a new energy comes into the room for the person who's on the journey. And I just started thinking more about how long-form music needs to exist for that. Partly because I just wanted it myself, you know, and you create what you want to hear in the world. So there's a selfish element. It's like I just needed to have this music exist. And then when it came to the title, well, the title actually came to me at the end of a ketamine trip, which when the album was in its infancy, But I was still, I was at the point where the structure was in place and it was quite clear to me where it was headed. And then I think it was a little bit of an homage to Brian Eno's format of titling, music for airports, music for films, which I really love that kind of blunt functionality in conjunction with quite magical music. And so the title just appeared to me like the actual words. I could actually just see them at the end of this trip. I was like, okay, that's about the clearest download I could really expect about what I'm supposed to be doing here. So, as we all know on psychedelics, sometimes these messages appear in extremely literal ways, and you just go, okay, that's that then. So I guess that's what I'm calling it. And then, the thing is, I was already out. The term being in the psychedelic closet is a strange one, but I was already out of that because Singularity, my previous album, had the DMT molecule on the front, and I talked a lot in that album about how psilocybin had shaped the main tracks on the album. So it wasn't like a bolt out of the blue really, but with this one it was just like, okay, this is much more serious, and if I'm going to create music for this space, I have to take it with a great degree of sincerity and like put everything into it. And there's just been this lack of focus and lack of attention on the musical component in these journeys, for particularly in all the, you can read endless wonderful studies with great results, but you won't find mention of the music in them. And it
Right.
felt like, calling it this and releasing it in this way felt like in my own small way as an indie artist, just trying to get that conversation going a little bit more, along with several others.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've also noticed that. I think it's one of the, I don't know, maybe elephants in the room, that music is such a central part of psychedelic therapy, psychedelic experiences more broadly. It's pretty much, it's pretty much accepted in the clinical trials and the kind of clinical application of that research in clinics like the ones we have at Numinous. And as you say, very little evidence base for that. And yet anyone who's ever had a psychedelic experience will say, that the music was pretty important. In fact, in a recent non-ordinary state experience I had with some friends, I had curated a playlist, and my friends said something to me like, Joe, where did you get that music? Like, kind of giving me credit for it, which I didn't really deserve, but it's so front and center. And what I find interesting is that I somehow sort of feel like your colleague all of a sudden, because you're contributing to the healing and the therapy of the people experiencing your music for psychedelic therapy. What does it feel like to you to be contributing in that way? Like directly involved, very personally involved in people's healing through the music you're producing.
Well, once you start to really think about it, it's actually very intimate and very strange that it's even possible. Because I know that from before the time when I made this record, when I listened to tracks that I love that work, by other people that work very well in the psychedelic space, I'm finding myself so deeply involved with their psyche and their experience of being human. And I always find myself wondering, like, there's this artist called Donato Dozzi who made a track called Vaporware 1, and I recommend this so wholeheartedly. It's one of the most inspirational pieces of music for me ever. I find myself wondering, like, where does that, because I don't know him, I've never met him, and I'm fascinated by where that comes from, how that exists, and am I listening to the inside of someone's soul and heart, because that's what it sounds like. And yet I've never met this person, and yet we all know each other on the deepest possible level. Like, we all share a consciousness, and so that's why I think it has to be taken really seriously if you're going to do it, and you're going to make it clear that that's what you're doing, because you're
right.
If people are essentially trusting you with something, and this is something I couldn't have done 5 years ago, like, let alone when I first started out in my late teens, like, I wouldn't have had a clue. It's taken me until my mid-ish 40s to actually go, okay, I think I know what might be helpful for some people. it's not going to work for everyone, but if it works for me, then presumably it must. There must be some chance that it will work for others. Particularly when it comes to the sonic side, I think I think we exist at this fascinating frontier in so many ways. Many ways of which are scary, but some of the ones that are incredible are how new technologies such as ketamine is a new thing, and the ability to create truly immersive music that comes from an intentional place and allows you to create 360 sound, the illusion at least of 360 degree sounding music, and then with new technologies like Dolby Atmos and all the other forms of much more detailed surround sound that we have, and the album was mixed in Dolby Atmos as well, so there's like a 16 channel version that you can go to certain places and hear. These technologies have emerged for a reason at a timely point, and it's a reaction as well to the instant gratification kick of the fact that you can listen to any song ever made immediately without really thinking about it by streaming. So whenever one force like that becomes dominant and too powerful, then the opposite will arise. So it's a reaction in a way to many things. And it's what we need, is obviously my view as a sort of composer and sound based, someone who's interested in the properties of sound for healing. It's not a coincidence that these things have become available when they have.
Yeah, let's stay on technology for a second. I know that you have collaborated with Ned Kalin on, that you've collaborated with Mendel Kalin on wave paths. And that's actually a tool that we use at Numinous.
Yes.
And I wanted to share a couple of experiences with you because I'm actually just super curious to hear your answer to this question. So first of all, let me say, I actually did a psychedelic therapy session yesterday as a therapist, and we were listening to music, and the participant was struggling to sort of connect with what was happening internally, and we were encouraging her to use the music as an anchor. And one of the things I invited her to do is think about the fact that there is a human who wrote or performed this music, and they were trying to express something about their experience, and that you can connect with the human on the other end of the music. And I think she found it helpful in terms of like stabilizing her attention and just connecting with the emotions that were sort of available and sort of in the room for her. And then relatedly, I tried wave paths myself a little while ago, again, experiencing an altered state. And I sort of had this moment of like, ugh, I don't like this. Who am I relating to? It's like, where is this music coming from? Is it like a bunch of code, an algorithm? Is it like a bunch of humans that like have been sliced and diced and delivered something to me through? Like, it was hard for me to connect to the sort of human emotional source of the music. And then like quickly I changed back to like hearing someone who was expressing something more directly. Just wanted to get your sort of take on that. And I'll just say, by the way, I asked my friend who I was journeying with if he wanted to try it. And he's like, ooh, that sounds kind of terrible. It's like eating a meatball that was grown in the lab instead of the real thing. I'll pause there. Just really curious to hear your kind of take on that.
Well, I think what's interesting about wave paths is that it is, it's all the music you hear on wave paths is separate human beings creating things in harmony with each other. It's actually quite a beautiful thing. It embraces the fact that this technology exists, and Mendel and his team have brought this to life, and they've got in touch with the composers they wanted to work with. And I believe that something that one of the first things they was working with was one of my pieces, and to the reason that a lot of the music you hear in wave paths is in the key of F is because my first piece was in the key of F, and I think a lot of the things that the things that followed that composition were they were, obviously it's gone far beyond that now, and I'm sure it goes all over the place now, but certainly last time I spoke to Mendel, there was a lot of stuff that had grown out of what I originally wrote. So really it's a kind of very modern way of humans collaborating with each other. They don't need to meet, but they're meeting in a different space. They're meeting in out there and the internet somewhere, and also in people's minds. So I tend to view it from that way. I personally haven't. I mean, I've had, when I've hung out with Mendel, he sometimes just has it on in the background, set to a certain very low interference mode, and it's amazing. It just sounds amazing. This is clearly, human constructed music. It has heart, and it's beautiful and it's tasteful, and there's so much dreadful music out there in the healing in quotes sphere. So he has good taste in music, and so it's kind of very human in a way. It just embraces what is possible. And if there was, I don't think it's technically possible due to the nature of my album, but if there was a way of wave parsing it so that you could, for example, just, in the heavier sections, and say the patient was going through something very deep and wasn't ready to leave that zone, then it would be amazing if the therapist could keep it there for a bit, but obviously that's not, it's just the level of complexity in the sound design and the composition is such that it's not possible as it stands, but maybe one day, we'll be able to actually do that, because obviously, my record just has a structure that is unchangeable. But on the flip side, then that structure is there for a reason, and it comes from decades of my own healing work, and so, I think there's room for both, really, and also, ultimately, I did just make an album that is also just an album, and Wave Parts is a whole new format, really. It's like there's nothing like it, and so yeah, I really think there's room for all of this, really.
Yeah, thanks. You just said you sort of made this album with borrowing from years and years of your own experience. And I've heard you talk about this album being very personal, like more personal than your others. And I started to think about that, and this is a bit silly, but I did some English literature in college, and I remember learning about the romantic theory of art, which basically says artists produce art as a kind of way to process emotion, right? That we sort of live these complex emotional lives, and we express our truth and our experience through whatever tools that we have, whether it's language or music or other, visual art or whatever. So to the extent that you're comfortable sharing, what was it that what emotional experiences were you processing in generating this album?
Well, I'll go back to what I said earlier, where, I don't tend to be conscious necessarily of what I'm doing when I'm writing. It's almost like a trance state. It's certainly a flow state. I mean, there was some clear things going on, okay, so we're not allowed to see each other because there's a pandemic on. There's that was present in the creation of some of it, but I think this was music I would have written either way. It's just I had the space to write it. But I was going through a breakup and loss and heartbreak and things that were to a level I'd never experienced before, and but then at the same time, I think every record at some point I've made, sometimes I honestly can't tell you where some of the darker stuff I've made comes from, but I can point to events in my life which will eternally need to be processed by me, because things happen in the formative years, and the word formative has that meaning for a reason, and so there are certain sort of that core wound, whatever it may be. We all have one, I think, of some kind, and are eternally trying to heal it. And as I got older and more in touch with that, I'm more and more clear that all the music making is a direct response to that, really. And then I'm also a big believer that we share a lot of the pain. You could look at immensely privileged life that I have had, in that I've never been in physical danger particularly, or threat of hunger or any of these things, but having those things not be an issue does not mean everything is fine. You can go through immense, it's not exactly a known truth that people with money are happy. There's a shared pain is obviously, there's huge spectrum, massive spectrum here of what people go through, but it's possible to be very, very I don't know, I think we all share great pain, just through the nature of existence and through the nature of what we witness and experience, and we're also able to share the healing of that and the joy that being alive can also bring. So I think this album kind of, whether consciously or not, has an expression of all of those things in it, and when I hear it under the influence of something, I'm like, wow, where did that come from? Because it's not me, it's everywhere. It's from everything,
There was something I wanted to ask you about that actually came out of my experience listening to your album, in a training experience I had with ketamine. And I actually want to do a bit of a deep dive into that in a little bit, but I wanted to come back to this kind of this universal quality, right? That we share the pain and we share the healing. And one of what felt like universal, and I've heard you speak about this in other interviews, and I wanted to kind of follow up, but these kind of like universal themes or archetypes or something, was this really like poignant and very clear expression of this this flip side, like this experience of like sadness and beauty coexisting. And I think you talked about that's a sort of a territory that you're comfortable in, that you find yourself expressing about. And that came through very loud and clear for me when I listened with the sort of enhancements of the ketamine. Pretty open-ended question here. There's something healing about being in touch with the beauty as the flip side of sadness. I'm just wondering, what does that mean to you, or like, why do you think that is?
It's difficult to say. All I know is that beauty, in quotes, it's not an isolated feeling or concept. For me, the most beautiful things have a tinge of sadness or melancholy, or, I mean, even extreme joy, when it has an emotional counterpart of some kind that's a little more complex. There's more nuance, there's more reality. I don't know, it's like, a good example musically would be Radiohead, where you have all these songs of just extreme poetic beauty with moments of real heartbreak, but also moments of joy. There's this kind of synergy between those two states and those two emotions, and it's always been the most interesting to me. I've never really known why, but apart from just to observe that when you, like, for example, when you go and view something truly beautiful, like, so one of my first, what I call kind of awakening experiences was at the Grand Canyon with my brother when I was 19, and we walked down it as far as we could go in a day. It turns out you're not supposed to do that. It turns out that like the park rangers that are walking up saying it's time to turn back now, it's like you should listen to them, but they were turning. Right. It's like it's 3 p.m. and they were like, you turn back, and we're like, well, no, we will, but we just thought, no, we want to go to the bottom. So we walked all the way to the first kind of edge, and at which time it happened to be sunset, and we weren't paying any attention to getting back. That idea didn't matter at this point. We were very much in the moment, and I saw the sunset down there, and then I saw, the shape of the south rim, the bit that's most like most hotels are and stuff, is like this kind of curved shape, and then when you're in the middle of that at the top, that looks like the whole thing. And then when you get to the bottom of this first section, you can see another of those curved shapes just as big, one along and another one along and another, and again and again and again, infinitely smaller and smaller to the horizon. And you should see, this mess of hotels and restaurants and people is just one tiny blob of light, and then there's absolutely nothing but the sky. And then I just had this immediate realization of our place in things, and my first true kind of nature-based epiphany of, that the entire cosmos really, and us as so minute, and yet that being an empowering thing, because it can bring you together. And I remember that's both a beautiful and a sad realization. There's something a little bit ineffable about it, and there is something inherently sad and also ecstatic about the fact that we're here briefly, and that's just how it is. It's the nature of the human condition, and we're lucky to be able to feel those things. And maybe beauty without sadness is meaningless. I don't know.
It's I'm with you 100%. What I'm hearing, or how it's resonating with me, is that when you see something beautiful, you quickly become aware of the temporary nature of it, or of our experience of it, or temporary nature of our lives, or whatever. And from a Buddhist perspective, I know you're a meditator. I'd wanted to kind of check in with you about that as well. Being aware of and in touch with the impermanent nature of being is an extremely important sort of foundational insight, and something that's also extremely important and therapeutic in a psychotherapy kind of environment as well.
Right.
So that's sort of what your kind of story there makes me think of. I'm not sure if that resonates with you, but I wonder, does your meditation practice come in, kind of play at all with this, sad beauty kind of space?
It's interesting because the meditation that's central to my life is transcendental meditation, and this is something very, very distinct from all the other forms I've tried.
Right.
I do regular breath work and Kundalini meditations, quite chakra specific things that I need for other reasons. But TM is like my baseline, and that's actually something that's more akin to presence and peace, and it doesn't really. It might open you up to be able to feel more generally. It's like the whole spectrum of life experience is enhanced by it, for sure. But it does also have a deep calming influence. And I think it's because when you transcend daily, like you get accustomed to that experience, fear of death decreases, and you can actually embrace impermanence, perhaps, but it is a beautiful thing as well. Like, who wants everything to stay the same forever? Like, that's not, and I think as anyone who's had a very potent psychedelic experience with something like DMT, you quickly become aware, I think anyway, that you don't know everything about the nature of consciousness and what happens to it after your physical body is not there, and it changed me from staunch atheism into complete agnosticism, or even to believing in something, just not willing to name what there's no name. It's just ineffable. But there's a kind of I embrace the ending of things. It doesn't, but sadness doesn't have to be a negative. It's not like I view something beautiful and immediately go, but that's going to end. It's more like, that's going to end. Therefore, it's all a pointer back to the present. It's all like an arrow going, okay, so the moment is the thing. And that is clearly, that's a shared view across so many different disciplines that there's definitely something in it.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So let me come back to the experience I had on ketamine, listening to your album shortly after it came out. Thoroughly enjoyable experience.
Right.
Healing in kind of surprising ways. Definitely had the sense of like, there's something sad here. I feel a little bit sad, but it's also incredibly beautiful. And I sort of thought like, like feeling like music for psychedelic therapy while I'm taking this like potent antidepressant. It's obviously more than that. It's like, and I still feel nice, interesting, kind of like not what I expected. The sort of crazier, weirder experience I wanted to ask you about was, I remember at one point, like I just had this impression that the music fit with the experience of the ketamine so well. I could not believe it. I was like, I literally had the thought like, wow, this ketamine is really good at music.
That's cool.
And so my question to you was like, what the hell, man? Did you do that?
Well, yes. No, I mean, no. So I don't know, but what I experienced the first times I had ketamine, which was when I was 27, 28, I had no idea what I was doing, and it's just like, oh, there's this thing, and your mates are taking it, and maybe you've had some drinks first, which is deeply inadvisable. But I did before overdoing it one day and having what was definitely a dangerous and terrible time. I did have some experiences with it where I was like, oh my god, it's like music is a place, a structure. And I remember when ketamine, it wasn't really widely at all discussed as anything that could be a deep healing modality like it is now. But it had a reputation here in the UK as a sort of slightly grotty club drug that, with the word K-hole, which I can't stand because it's a sacred space that you go into. You shouldn't be at a club when you do it, in my opinion. It's each their own to do what they want, but like it doesn't. That's the last place I would want to do it. It has this incredible ability to turn, like it's almost like a blank canvas. That's how I think of it. So if you were to do it with no music in a empty room on your own, I mean, I don't know. I feel like you can guide yourself inwards to a degree, but it seems to me more open to external influences like music and setting. I mean, I guess every psychedelic is, but there's this, like when you described it as nice still, or that word, or safety even, I always find that fear isn't really a part of it, and that in the same way as MDMA, there's something that allows you therefore perhaps to go further. If you can approach difficult parts of yourself or your shadow from a place of non-judgment and safety, then sometimes with mushrooms it can be like so brutal or terrifying, or it can also be the opposite. It really, you get strong moments of self-love but also deep moments of shame. And ketamine just doesn't seem to have those things so much. It's like so to go back to your question, I think like if this album works well for that, it's because that's what I don't know, that's just that's how I was testing it, that's how I was making it. I would test it on ketamine every few weeks and see how it's like from an audio point of view, even just from a technical point of view. Listening to it in that state of receptivity, is that a word? I don't know. It was like there is no sharper magnifying tool than that. So, my normal waking consciousness, I could hear a certain section. There's a track on there called Love Flows Over Us in Prismatic Waves. These titles were not built to be read out loud, as I'm discovering. But they're more, the titles are supposed to read like one simple poem, really. But that track has this section, like a couple of minutes in, which I knew the intention of all along, but I sonically hadn't got right. But I wasn't aware of how wrong I'd got it until I went in there on ketamine and listened. And I was like, this is off. This is like wading through shit. It's awful. It was very extreme how wrong it was. Whereas in normal consciousness, you'd hear it and go, yeah, that's okay. That's okay. That's nice. But it wasn't at all okay. It was like, there's something jarringly wrong about this. We're talking in minutiae here, but just several of them being out of place. So I rebuilt that section with the information I'd brought back from that trip. And now it is how it's supposed to be. So that's an example of perhaps how it's tailored very specifically for ketamine, because that's how it was tested, and that was the tool, really. It's not like, like going into it to that degree is a bit like the equivalent of playing it on the big speakers in the studio for your record label or your management or whatever. It's like the really analytical listen. And so it's actually incredibly unforgiving, and that's what it needed to be, because like I said earlier, I take the job very seriously of providing music for these experiences, so it's got to be right.
Yeah. So I think here about your fellow Brit Robin Carhart Harris, who published one of my favorite articles on the neuroscience of psychedelic experiences, arguing that the most important mechanism, neuroscience or neurobiological mechanism, that psychedelics bring to the brain is sensitivity to context, right? We just become dialed in so much, right? It's the kind of the neuroscience version of set and setting, right? Yeah. You have to take care of set and setting because people become really, really sensitive to that stuff. Now, it just sort of occurred to me hearing you talk about this, like, what a insane gift or very sort of different novel experience for a musician such as yourself to be creating something in a very particular mind state, like non-ordinary, enhanced by this molecule. And then your listeners are going back, taking the same molecule, entering the same non-ordinary state. And again, there's that sense of like fit and shared experience, which can you get any other way as a musician, like creating? Like how else would you create such a strong fit between what you're creating and expressing and what people are hearing on the other end?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the most intimate connection I think I've felt with what I'm making and what people are experiencing. But the closest equivalent would be like, if you look at my dance music output or techno stuff or whatever you want to call it, the MDMA influence on that is felt by the crowd that are experiencing it. This is a very much more external experience. It's not so much about inward looking, it's more collective, it's more sharing rhythm together, but that's there's something in common there as well. But but this thing is like a very, very inward version of that, like the deep inward dive. And I was talking to a friend the other day about this for some reason, and he said the first time he listened to this record, he was like, I really want to go on an amazing walk in nature and put this on good headphones. And he found off the first track, he said, this is wrong. This it doesn't lend itself. It's not supposed to accompany the outer world. He's just like had to turn it off, and then when he got back home, he turned the lights off and listened to it on the sofa. And it's like, that's what it's for. It's not, this is a very specific pointer inwards. You could be looking at the most beautiful landscape in the world, but I don't personally think that's what it's for, and it doesn't make sense in that context. So it's an extremely precise kind of thing what it's for in a way. Yeah. And I get people sometimes saying, really. Sorry. I just say I get sometimes people saying that they put it on if they want to maybe like have it on while they're cooking or something, and they just keep finding that it doesn't. They either have to sit down and listen or put something else on, so it doesn't lend itself to casual. I think it's because it's just quite a serious sounding thing, and that's just where I was at the time, or that's what needed to come through. Who knows?
I had that exact experience this past weekend. I went back to the album, and I was out in a jog, and it was like, this does not work. And actually, one of the realizations, like, the rhythm of jogging is too fast, right? And it's kind of what happens a little bit with ketamine as a dissociative anesthetic. Like things really slow down. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, and I just like suddenly quite struck by sort of the pacing and what sort of I needed to be doing with my body and my attention, and running was not it. As you say, it's a very sort of precise thing that it's calibrated for, except I actually had a really profound and beautiful experience listening to the last track, Sitting Around the Fire, which I'm going to ask you about in a minute. But there was something about that, maybe it was the lyrics, that allowed me to connect to the music in a way that I couldn't with the other tracks. I don't know if you have any explanation of that, but just wanted to share that I sort of, I've had the experience of understanding the precision, right, of having it really fit when I did it with ketamine and really not fit in doing something else.
So wait, but did Sit Around the Fire fit with jogging? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
great. That's great. I mean,
I wasn't. Go ahead.
No. Sorry, because your picture is off at the moment. But I think it's like it was the entry point to the album. It was the first thing that we released from it, and it's a less abstract piece of music, and it doesn't really have sadness about it. And there is a great spiritual teacher's words there, and they were recorded beautifully on a tape machine 40 years ago, well, way before I was born, actually 50 years ago or whatever. So there's a timeless kind of universality to that, I think. And then there's East Forest beautiful backing vocals there as well. So yeah, I mean it's like it's the single, it's the radio single. So maybe it just has, maybe that's the gateway drug for the album, as it were.
Right. I should add that I was sort of like going through something personal on that jog, and I was out on a country road in a beautiful natural setting. So like if I was on the treadmill, I don't think it would quite have the same impact.
I honestly, this is a divergence, but like I don't understand why treadmills exist outside of I think when we look back at this ridiculous era of history, the things that will be laughed at, well, that's definitely one of them. I mean, unless you're literally somewhere where it's impossible to go outside and run.
You're talking to someone who will continue running outside in January in Montreal, which is cold. Not a comfortable place to be running outside. And I'm with you on the treadmill thing.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. I actually really welcome the extremes of weather when running. I think it's enlivening and empowering to go, oh yeah, you know what? I mean, Wim Hof method has helped with this a lot, but just knowing that cold isn't going to hurt you and understanding that actually you have it within you to resist it. I mean, running in the rain is the best. Running in the cold, you're going to warm up. It's great.
Yeah.
It's good for you.
Yeah.
So.
And there's something about finishing the run, being very, very underdressed and still feeling sort of powerfully protected from the elements. It's a really awesome feeling.
Yeah.
I think I'll take the opportunity here to do a bit of a deeper dive on music, on Sitting Around the Fire. First, though, really interesting to me that the convention, and again, no science on this, the convention is typically music for psychedelic experiences doesn't have lyrics, right?
Right.
And Wave Path's stuff doesn't have lyrics, and all the tracks except Sitting Around the Fire don't have lyrics. Why do you think that is? Why do you think instrumental music is a better fit for psychedelic experiences?
Well, I think talking to Mendel and the Wave Path's perspective and to Roz as well, is like lyrics are perhaps too precise an influence, or too much of a direct, non-abstract communication from the artist. I personally love having songs on. Part of my, if I'm tripping to something, I will always have some songs on, because I don't immediately get guided away from the experience by that. But in general, I can see how it brings in elements of culture, even through the accent of the person singing or talking. There's just all this other energy that's brought in by it. So I guess it feels like a safer kind of broader, perhaps more accessibly relevant thing. When I make instrumental music anyway, and collaborations with vocalists I've done have generally been off the albums, but this track was clearly supposed to be the end of an album, and it appeared, in East Forest. I'm very grateful that he sent me this talk to work over, and then he made the amazing vocal parts behind it, and it was just so wild to me that I would have Ram Dass at the end of my album. But to me it seems like it's sort of summing up the experience and putting, because I suppose there's a big difference between this kind of thing and then just having a song on with lyrics, because these words that he's stating are sort of, for me, the heart of it all, the heart of existence, and certainly summing up the intention of the album, and therefore what you've gone through for the last hour. And it's interesting, people have generally found that it's a deep release when you get to that end bit, because no longer are you just alone with your thoughts on your journey. You've got someone who's been through all that to an incredible degree, further than most of us ever will, and come back with this wisdom. So yeah, that's why it's there.
Yeah. I want to actually ask you about the lyrics. Yeah, I was really, really touched again, listening to them recently. And if you'll humor me for a second, I'm just going to read the last section so that the listeners know what we're talking about. So it goes something like this. As if in each of us there once was a fire, and for some of us there seem as if there are only ashes now. But when we dig in the ashes, we find one ember, and very gently we fan that ember, blow on it, it gets brighter, and from that ember we rebuild the fire. Only thing that's important is that ember. That's what you and I are here to celebrate. That though we've lived our life totally involved in the world we know that we're of the spirit. The ember gets stronger, the flame starts to flicker a bit, and pretty soon you realize that all we're going to do for eternity is sit around the fire. I'm a little embarrassed hearing my own voice do that, because on the track it's just so beautifully performed by Ram Dass. But I wanted to ask you, from your like really, really intimate relationship with those words and the music, what is the fire? What is the ember? What do we celebrate?
Well, I think let's start with the ashes. You know, we often feel isolated, alone, and like this. We've kind of somehow been persuaded that all of this is meaningless to some degree. Some of us have.
I'm definitely familiar with the ashes, John.
Yes, so we know where the ashes are. But then
didn't ask about those.
But I feel like, well, in order to think about the ember, it's nice to think about the ashes, because I feel like from what you said, you're familiar with the ember as well. And
yes,
you know, I would say the stage I'm at is I've found that ember and I'm desperately blowing on it and trying to rebuild the fire. But really, what that ember is to me is the divine spark. There's something that you, when you connect to it, whether it's through meditation or psychedelics, or for me, it's always the way the two inform each other. You sink into that place of total oneness and unity, and that's your inherent knowledge that there is a part deep inside of you that is shared by everyone, that is the divine spark. I mean, the words for it don't really cover it, but that's there, and I think you touch on that sometimes. People, atheistic views will also touch on that through perhaps just not use the same words, but you can feel that infinite oneness through looking at a landscape, or gazing at a loved one, or being in love, or staring into the eyes of your newborn child. Is like that magic, that kind of that ineffable wonder that it's possible to feel. And in psychedelics, you get to spend some time there. You get to spend sometimes a few hours in that state, and then you're like, when you're in there, you're like, how will I ever not be like this again? Of course, you come out and everything comes back, but in that time, you're fanning that ember. You're like, you're not forgetting everything. You come out, okay, you go back to normal, but not quite back to normal. And each time you fan it, for me, it's like the most important thing is daily practice, for sure, because psychedelics are like, they open the door, and occasionally you need a reminder, and they will get you there. But it's what you do every day that it's got the biggest chance of fanning that ember. And then as to what the fire is, I like to think of it as the collective, all finding their embers, and us collectively rebuilding the knowledge of our own innate divinity that kind of that we need in order to make sense of this, and also to survive. And also he's talking about infinity. He's talking about the fact that after your, this is obviously a belief system, but it all is really, after your physical body is no longer with you, consciousness is just, your spark of consciousness just goes back to join the rest. and you're all one again. That's what will happen in the end anyway. So maybe that's what the fire is.
It's so fascinating. Maybe it's because I know like the title of the track or how the lyrics end, but it did feel like there was something like collective or connecting about the ember, right? So it's phrased, it's like in each of us is an embers. It's like this individual thing, but in the way you describe your sort of interpretation of what that is, it does involve connecting to others. And then it is explicit at the end that it becomes something that we share. So yeah, I just found that fascinating. Maybe it's because we're social animals or something. I'm not sure.
We are, but also, life is about relationships.
Yes.
Ultimately, and I think perhaps a lot of people that get to the end of their lives and having focused far more on personal ambition, they get to the end and go, "Oh shit, it wasn't about that," And I think. Also, I love the image that he conjures because obviously it's a metaphor, but the way he's also conjuring this thing that we as humans have always done, since we had our modern anatomical forms and the brains that we have. We've had fire and we've sat around the fire and we've stared into it, and it brings about a gentle meditative state, and it's a unifying thing. You sit around it not just to get warm, but to stare into it, and you can sit there having conversations and fall into silence, and at no point does it feel like there's this beautiful focal point to it all, that's ever changing, and it's deeply wired into what we are, I think.
Yeah.
Over hundreds of thousands of years, maybe.
Yeah. I've often think that the little magical devices we walk around with in our pockets, these smartphones, are like the 21st century version of the fire we're sitting around. It's like this light that we stare into that connects us and stuff. But it is not quite as peace-inducing and relaxing as actually sitting around the fire. It's quite a distance from that, actually, and it's scary if you contemplate that distance or that gap that we're all kind of contemplating right now, because there's a lot of stress and suffering, actually, because we're sitting around perhaps the wrong fire.
We're sitting around fire, yeah. I mean, in a way, these things are the opposite, because obviously you can control how they're set up. But I know I have some friends who have like the news app like sending notifications to their phone, which means you might go on there to send a message to someone, and you're going to get a notification every time the worst thing that's just happened has happened. So
in the world,
like in the world, right? So I don't know who it was who said this, but I heard on some podcasts it's just like we did not evolve to take on a daily string of like information, a stream of information about the worst things that have happened to a population of 7 or 8 billion people. That is not within our makeup or our capabilities, and so these devices, I have mine set up with no notifications of any kind, and I only use it to communicate with other people, but I have to use Instagram for work, and that sucks you into certain things, and it's been designed to suck you in more and more and more. And it's an object of distraction rather than connection, even though it manifests like some connections. Obviously there's good and bad to it, like a lot of people I am connected to at the moment I met that way, other artists you meet through Instagram, whatever. There's obviously there's pluses and minuses here, but it's definitely not the fire, and there's just we have a society that's like looking to create as many distractions from the fire as possible, or from the innate wonder behind being alive, and the phone's like a hyper accelerated version of that, I think.
I think I appreciate the reminder. I think I'm going to turn off all my notifications as soon as we hang up here.
I just think I'm too sensitive. I cannot handle it. Like there's no way I could go about my day like and I've seen the way people's faces change. They're like having a nice time and they look at their phone for something. Maybe they're going to show you a picture they like, and then they'll see these things have come in, and whether it's just from their email or whatever, and suddenly your work is suddenly in the room when it wouldn't have been. 20 years ago. Like, you were not
Totally.
when you were off, you were off, and we've created a
Yes.
world where that is not the case, and you can obviously enforce it on your own device, but it surprisingly, so many people don't want to, and it's like, you're creating a world where you're constantly available.
Yeah.
And there's even there's brain effects of staring at these LED screens all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not natural, and it's a deviation from what we evolved for. So yeah, it's like, of course, it's a part of the fabric of how we will move things forward, hopefully, but it's definitely a very nuanced and complicated thing.
I've noticed since the pandemic, I don't know what it's like where you are, but here, paper menus are a thing of the past because, in principle, people are concerned about the virus being transmitted through the touch, right? So they don't want to like print menus every time. They don't want to have menus that they recycle because people are touching them. So when you sit down at a restaurant now, it's a barcode. And the first thing that everybody does when they arrive is take out their phones and scan the barcode so you can see what you're going to eat. And then 5 minutes later, you and your 4 friends are staring down at their phones and they're on Instagram or whatever. It's really messed up. I really hate that.
So I have to say, are you in Canada?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did notice that there. I was there recently. It's like, wait, because we had that here briefly and everyone hated it, and it's gone. And I think it's literally the opposite of an expert on COVID, but I do understand. I think that air transmission was more of an issue than menus, and I think there's, what really,
right.
what I think happened is that there's very clever tech companies out there who sold this technology in very, very quickly. Okay, there's the QR code, so now you can do it on your phone. It takes so much of the joy out of the experience. Like,
yes,
it's just, it makes it not sociable. And like you say, of course, there'll be everyone will get barrage of other stuff coming in while they're looking at what beer they want to order, which used to be a simple, enjoyable thing of browsing a nice draft list is now like scrolling. Totally. So yeah, I hope. I've noticed it's different in lots of countries. I haven't seen one in England for a long time now, but we fully had gone that way, and I was like, oh my god, this better not be permanent. In America, it was some places yes, some places no, but in Canada, everywhere was like, this is it now. I was like, no, come on, menus were not the responsible thing here. That is not the agent of transmission for this entire pandemic was not menus. So, yeah, fingers crossed. Because there's direct winners to that, and it's the people that invented that technology, and they're just going, great, we've nailed this, come on.
More territory where we can expect people to be looking down at their phones. I think I'm going to feel a little more emboldened when I go to the restaurant and ask for a paper menu, not feel so awkward anymore after this chat. We're coming up on an hour here, and I want to be respectful of your time. Really enjoyed our conversation so far. I wanted to ask you about what it's like. The album's been out for a number of months. Mm-hmm. You're probably getting lots of feedback. So I'm curious about that. Why don't we start there? And then I have one more question for you related to that. So this is really personal stuff, really precise, as we talked about before. What has it been like to see it out in the world and to know that you have this intimate connection with all these people?
Well, it's really, the only word I keep coming back to is it's an honor. It's just this crazy honor, and I don't feel, because I know how messy my internal world is, and, I think, to me it seems kind of ridiculous that people I meet think I might know anything at all, because I don't really, in terms of how to deal with, my life's as messy as anyone's, but the album has something on it that doesn't come from me. It comes from way beyond. It's the plants and medicines I've interacted with, all the other people I've interacted with, and also just being alive in the universe. All that stuff is there, and I'm just a sort of vessel that it came through. So sometimes when I meet people who think I might have something interesting to offer beyond that album, they will go away disappointed as a general rule. But I just think it's incredible that it can be helpful, and yeah, some of the responses have been really moving and really, really extraordinary.
That's beautiful. You've done different kinds of music. And I'm thinking for some reason of like the dance music where, you know, you can play a DJ set and people will dance, or DJs can take your music and people will dance and stuff. Or, and of course, the whole like DJ set or concert experience has also been put under the microscope or disrupted by COVID as well. I haven't been to a concert in many years.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. I also have little kids who are the real culprit here, but
Sure.
it's just hard to get out. But what I wanted to ask you is, what's it like sort of performing or getting this stuff out? And I will say that I did go to Music as Medicine in LA, and it was really mind-blowing. So I don't know if that qualifies as a concert. I did go to that. But I'm not sure it does. And
no, that wasn't really.
I was there with.
Yeah. Sorry, Karen.
I was there with my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm talking so much here, but wanted to share with you. I was there with my wife, and we were both just like so touched. And I think that Peyton, who's the host on behalf of Numinous, and East Forest, kind of said a few words before and just set the container so beautifully that we were all sort of there to heal in our own way. So it did not feel like a concert, even though there were 300 people there to listen to music together. And I just found it so touching and and so beautiful. And my wife and I were just chatting like, what the hell was that? It's like, she used to go to a bunch of raves when she was younger. So it's like, it's a bit like a chill out room at a rave. So that was familiar to her. But she said, and I'm a meditation background. It's like, felt like a group meditation, maybe like a perfect actually marriage for her and me. But again, like, what the hell was that? And is this something you're going to be doing more of? And yeah, so just your thoughts on concerts and music as medicine as a kind of event.
Yeah, I mean, I think this particular thing you're describing, Music as Medicine event, was the first Aubrey Marcus hosted in Austin last September, I think it was, and that was the first time anyone had heard the album. That was like the album premiere before it came out, and it was one of the most moving and powerful things I'd experienced, just to suddenly be sharing my entire soul with this room full of people who are, a lot of whom are, quite deeply into the medicine, and people doing breath work, and there's even some chanting, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of breathing, there was a lot going on. It was an intense thing. And you're right, yes, it has elements in common with those other things, but it's a new thing, and East Forest has been pioneering this for a bit with his ceremonial format concerts, but also Secular Sabbath, which is a beautiful series of events, has this it's sort of California based, but they do events in different places, which has a kind of it's about intentional listening as well, and people sitting around doing things together, and these things are popping up in different places in different ways because of a collective desire to experience them and to experience them together. Like so far, all that I've done at these things is had the album played back, but through multi-channel formats and to people who are all listening together. Otherwise, it's so that's what makes it different from listening on your own. And then I tend to, if I'm there, we'll do a piano improvisation at the end. But over time, I want to work out ways of doing something that's kind of more live. I don't think it will never be like live versions of that album in the order it's in. But maybe I'll be making more of a kind of a set that involves more of that kind of stuff for people that are lying down. But I still love the dance music thing, and I still love, because it can be equally spiritual in what people can experience. There can be I like kind of sneaking that into the dance floor, through hiding these drones in there. You might have a kick drum, but that's really it's just like a drumming circle, which is also a part of the spiritual practice for a lot of people. So I think these things are just finding their way out because they need to.
Cool. Really appreciate that. I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to share, something we didn't cover, something that you wanted to say that didn't get a chance to say from earlier?
I'd just like to say thank you for the questions and the conversation, because it was great. It was really interesting, and touched on a lot of new things for me. So yeah, I hope it's been fun for you as well.
Very much so. And again, thank you so much for making the time and for chatting, and can't wait to discover more of what you're creating.
Oh, thanks very much, Joe. Cheers.
All right, Jon, take care. Thanks again.
Okay, cool. See you later.
Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinous, a mental wellness company committed to tackling the global mental health crisis by delivering best-in-class psychedelic-assisted therapies, contributing to the body of primary and clinical psychedelic research, and fostering healing through community connection and social responsibility. You can learn more about Numinous at numinous.com. That's Numinus.com. If you enjoyed the show today and you want to support us, here's how you do it. Rate and review the show on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe to the Numinous YouTube channel, like the videos, and share it. Share the show or clips of the show with someone that you think will enjoy it. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.